Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Success Sadhana. My name is JM, and I welcome you all to a program today where we'll discuss how to thrive by embracing reality with our speaker, Vaish, a veteran Bhakti yogi, author, and former monk. We have close to 25 members on Zoom and 20 members on Facebook. I have Anushri helping me out in managing social media today. Good afternoon, Vaish. Welcome to another episode of Success Sadhana.
Thank you so much, JM. I'm really happy to be here. And thank you, everyone, for sneaking in here during your lunch hour or whatever you may be doing. It's so nice to be together just for a respite here. And the subtitle, Need We Fear Reality? It's an interesting question I ask myself, because what's the foundational aspect of existence, of my existence? Is it something that I need to hide from? Or should I be looking more closely and searching for my original consciousness? Is it something good, or am I forever being tossed in this ocean-like existence from one state of consciousness to another, and that's just the way it is, or are we products of matter and so forth? Well, there's a lot of beautiful self-evident, what I mean by self-evident, I'll say in a second, answers to these questions in the body of knowledge that I so frequently refer to as the wisdom literatures, almost so much so that it sounds like jargon, but I try to be as generic as possible in mentioning them, because originally in Sanskrit they're called Veda, which just means knowledge anyway. I like the word wisdom because it sounds like something that's been processed for us. And of course, those who have studied philosophy know that there are certain kinds of knowledge in this world that are self-evident. For instance, we know that we exist, don't we? Please say yes. Descartes had given this as a foundational point of philosophy. I think, therefore I am. I'm aware. And how are you going to prove that you exist? You have to know that there are certain aspects of our lives through which we know, because it's self-evident. We know that we exist. When we're dreaming and we come out of our dream, we have a sense that the state we're in now is more real than the dream. And we're able to objectify the dream and think of, oh, I was in that dreaming state and now I'm more conscious than I was before. And the Veda, or the wisdom literature, gives us what is called swata pramanam. Pramana means evidence of our lives that is self-evident. And so there's a way that when we read it, when we hear it, we go down a rabbit hole into reality, not like Alice. Remember Alice in Wonderland? She went down the rabbit hole. Was it a rabbit hole? Into non-reality. Everything was topsy-turvy when she got there. However, there are portals, the human through which we can experience reality. The human body is one of them. It is a great fortune to get a human body. It's a major upgrade. It's the best upgrade you can possibly get in the lottery of the species. It's not really a lottery because it doesn't happen necessarily by chance. There's a systemization to the whole process, as we've talked about before. But once we're in a human body, we have the wherewithal to experience reality. And so today's topic is, should we fear reality? Is it beautiful? Is reality beautiful? Or when we get to the core of our existence, is it something horrifying? Well, actually, the Veda, the wisdom literature, say reality is beautiful. It's all we're looking for, and much, much more than we can imagine. So there are ways in which in this world we try to peel back layers through psychology, because our mental states are very complicated. But when we come to a clear state of consciousness, a yogic state through which we can actually examine ourselves and also our connection to our source, then there's a state we call yoga, or connection, through which we feel complete and whole without any extra additions needed. Everything's complete. We feel complete. So today we'll talk a little bit about the difference between reality and illusion. One of my favorite books on bhakti is called the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's 18,000 poetic verses. And I think that's more than Milton's Paradise Lost. And it is about, it's a treatise on distinguishing reality from illusion for the welfare of all. This is the project of the book, is to distinguish reality from illusion. So we'll talk a little bit about what those things mean and how they're interrelated also. Because when we talk about this spiritual topic, there's underlying foundational understanding that we're all one in a sense, but there are aspects, there are divisions in that oneness, if I may sound contradictory. It's because they're not actual divisions, they're varieties. There's a variety within the oneness. So this is called Achintya Beda Bed Tattva, means inconceivable oneness and difference simultaneously that we can experience for ourselves. So let's start off just for a moment with a little bit of introspection. So if you're sitting, then just sit a little straighter than you were a moment ago and bring your awareness to your breath. And it's helpful if you close your eyes. And as you're breathing, you can count to 3 on the exhale and 3 on the inhale, and calibrate your breath, get it going in a regular way. And then let all the other thoughts that may have been swirling fly off as a storm that passes. And then be alone with your breath and be alert but relaxed. Count 3 out and 3 in. And as you're breathing, then on the next inhale, I'm going to count 3 out and then inhale, and we'll do a mantra that synchronizes all of our energies in the region of the heart. It's a 1-syllable mantra, Om. So I'm inhaling at 1, 2, 3, and we can chant together. Om. 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 And now just be aware that you're within a human body. It has a framework in the bones. There's skin stretched across the framework. There's a series of organs. They're all synchronized and working together in harmony. And you, the conscious entity, are there within the body. You're not your body. This body is a loner. A special technology, it's a portal through which we can come to self-awareness and then awareness of our source, and come to reality. Notice that you can objectify the body from your vantage point as the seer within the body. You can notice that it is a mechanical entity, and you're the one observing it. And if you were to practice, then at any time, even as you're moving about the world, interacting with people at various levels, amidst various controversial meetings, you can stay on one level aloof and notice that these things are going on, but you have your vantage point, which is beyond the body, even beyond the mind. And now take a couple of more breaths and be aware of the nurturing quality of your breath. Very alert mind, but deep relaxation within your body. And then rub your hands together to get some external sensation. Open your eyes and come back into the Zoom room. And we can go into some discussion through which we can look into this topic of reality versus illusion for the welfare of all. So let's look at a few slides, JM. This is one of the basic definitions given in the Bhagavad Gita, which says, Nasato vitate bhavo, nabhavo vitate sata, ubayora pitushtontas tvanayos tattva darshivi. A tattva darshivi means somebody who can see reality and sees the different categories of energy. For instance, we were talking about how we're not our bodies. A tattvadarshi, a seer of reality, sees that I'm a different category of energy from my body. The word tat is cognate in English with the word that. Something that you can point to is tat or that. Demonstrative, a pronoun. And so a seer is someone able to notice that there's different qualities of energies. That's one point. And there are two major categories of energies. Some of them are constantly changing, and some of the energies are not changing. So as an example, you don't have a beginning and an end. Your body does. You don't have a beginning or end, your body does. I just want to know how that makes you feel hearing that statement. That's a paraphrase of what's in the Bhagavad Gita and other wisdom literatures, which is a foundational point of the spiritual practice, knowing the difference between you and your body. The body is made of energies that are constantly changing. We're the observer of the body. We don't change. We existed before we got this body. We'll exist after we drop this body off at the shop or wherever it goes. So let's come back in and feed the chat box a little bit. It's starving over here. Poor chat box, please give it a little something to eat. And also bring your beautiful countenances and voices into the discussion. If we were in a person in a room right now, I'd be able to see you all. Remember the old days, back before the pandemic? And so how do you feel about the statement? That's the question right now, that your body is changing, but you're not. Before you had this body, you existed. when this body ends, and of course the body's always changing, so the body I think I have now will end and is ending all the time. It's constantly changing. Yay, Charles.
Hello, hello.
Hey.
I feel like this is very timely for me. If you can see me right now, maybe I'm feeling. But I'm icing here my neck. So I was playing a softball game yesterday, and I was playing in the outfield a little bit. I had balls coming my way, and I kind of decided, pretty late that I wanted to really go for this one. So I sped up a little bit, and my body just flew towards the ball. Didn't end up catching it, but I did roll over and really hurt my neck. And at that point, I started thinking, kind of after the play, when I was younger, I could do all these things. I was so agile, I could make these cool plays. Now it's much more difficult, and I get hurt when I attempt to do these things. And I really saw that kind of difference that, my body is getting to the point where it's can't do the same things it used to, so I'm seeing this element of it aging and changing. But of course, I'm this thing inside that's observing this. So definitely very interesting, and makes me one case appreciate my health, but then also definitely see this separation between the two.
Well put, and a real life example. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. I hope you feel better soon too.
Thank you.
Yes, what about Jean said something?
Yeah, so Jean said, it's hard to grasp that. All I can really understand is the physical and now. Yes,
this is a really good point, Jean. This is a point made, remember that book I mentioned earlier, the Srimad Bhagavatam? Well, there's a saint in it. Her name is Devahuti. And there's a conversation between her and her son, who becomes her teacher. He is a very powerful sage. So she tells him that I hear this philosophy, I'm not my body, but it's very hard to realize. How do you actually come to know? And he gives a couple of examples that are really helpful about spiritual practice, which helps to understand that there's something otherworldly that's going on when we take up the spiritual practice. We can't pry our way in, but if we situate ourselves in a way that we're around spiritual sound vibration and we're following the practices that are recommended, we'll start to notice a difference. And the example that her son, who's named Kapiladev, gives is that when you eat food, it gets digested in the stomach and perfectly apportioned to the rest of the body. That is, the nutrients go to the right places. And so he said, in the same way, when you take to the process of bhakti yoga, it's just like a digestion process. You may not see exactly how it's going on, but you'll, in due course of time, be able to understand the difference between your body and yourself by the digestive power, so to speak, of the bhakti process. It's quite natural and organic. It's nothing we have to force ourselves into, and it's also not an intellectual process so much as it's our natural state. And to be, or in other words, reality means to see the difference, and we can come to see that through aligning ourselves in ways that harmonize with our original conscious existence. Go ahead, Jay. I think there's a little more.
Yeah. Linda says, I second what Charles said. I got some x-rays today that said I have some arthritis in my knee. I feel too young inside to have this. Enjoy your youth.
Thanks. When I was visiting a doctor recently, and she looked at my card just a few days ago and goes, "Oh, you just turned 65." And I looked behind me like, "Who are you talking to?" Because it sounded like, "Oh yeah, that's a big accomplishment, 65." I was like, "I'm not 65." And I said, oh yeah, my body is 65. But it sounded like, or it felt to me as if she were talking to someone else, because I related with what you just said about feeling different from the body. Myself is always young. My body's changing. That's one of the first observations.
Mayank has a point. Knowing that we are non-changing and different from the body helps to greatly reduce anxiety about preserving what we have, like job, family, wealth, etc.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I mean, it all passes through. What to speak of? Last night we had a session online, and one very brilliant participant. We were talking about death, what it means when you leave the body, and so forth. And he was saying there's a complete reassessment at the time of death of priorities. I found just that observation to be brilliant. But what we're doing now is preemptively reassessing. And this is one of the processes of self-actualization, is to reassess before we're forced to reassess. I saw it with my mother. She was an intellectual, and she was very much into thinking and processing things, but didn't want to go beyond that until just before she was leaving her body. And I had some really profound conversations with her. And one of them was, well, first of all, my observation was that she was looking at the world in a completely different light, with a very different perspective, given the fact that she was going to leave her body very soon. And I noted that she was extremely objective at that point. And it is something that we can do ourselves to objectify, and it makes us more enlightened in the way that we interact with the world. Thanks for feeding the chat box, by the way, everyone. I think it's starting to feel a little satisfied.
Subhadra has a point. She says, it sounds like maybe you're saying that in time, it'll be more an experiential as opposed to theoretical intellectual understanding.
Yes, in fact, that's one of the statements in the Bhagavad Gita Krishna makes, pratyakshavagam dharmyam. This kind of practice called dharma, or sanatana dharma, or realizing reality and the nature of the self, is pratyaksha. You'll directly experience it. And it becomes self-evident, something you see for yourself. It's important because we can't live on just philosophy or theory. We actually have to be living in something, experiencing it. It has to be filling us up in order for us to be intrigued by it or to continue. We can be intrigued by philosophy or the intellectual process, but to actually live in it, we have to have some real experience. So that's why there is a practice. And through the practice, one will have breakthroughs. Oftentimes they're major breakthroughs. For instance, there was this, there's a story in the Srimad Bhagavatam about a little boy named Narada. And Narada he was in a single parent home. His father was nowhere to be found. And these two very advanced yogis came and stayed at Narada's house when he was only 5 years old, and his mother and Narada were taking care of them. See, this was a tradition in India because there's this monsoon season. There's 4 months when it's very rainy, and at that time, sages, yogis, they would stay in one place and do their practices under one roof without going out, because it was very difficult to travel at those times. So they use it as a time to really go deep in their practice and not move around. So they stayed there for at least 4 months. And Narada, as a little boy, got really interested in their practices. And he was watching them, asking them some good questions. And he was a precocious child. They appreciated him. They liked him very much because he was, even though he was so young, he was very serious about spiritual practice. And after they left, soon afterwards, the sages left. And then Narada's mother died. She was bitten by a snake and passed away. So he was left alone in the world. And by that time, he had received so much wisdom and inspiration from these extremely advanced yogis that he walked away from his homestead. And he started traveling by himself in various places. He was looking around the world, noticing how the different energies of the world were working. And he wasn't afraid. And he had learned some practices. So in his travels one day, he sat down in a forest, I think one that looks kind of like the one Mayank is sitting in right now, if you can see him on the screen. You know, he's a photographer. These are his original pictures. He was sitting down in this dense forest, and he started to meditate and do his mantras and practice. And he had an extreme experience where he realized that he wasn't his body, and he realized his connection with original conscious divine source. And he was in a state of ecstasy, but just for a moment. And then he lost it. He came out of it. And have you ever heard of people who have, for instance, in a hospital? It's a different context altogether, but it can give us a little understanding of how this might feel. Some people, my friend Matthew, who was a paramedic for 20 years, said, in many occasions, people who had been in comas or been incapacitated and then came back into consciousness mentioned how they had an experience beyond their body, and they saw their body, but then they came back into it. And many of them said they were not particularly eager to go back in their body, because we're very subtle. We're subtle beings. And then when we are able to objectify the body and see, and we see it for the grosser energy that it is, it becomes a little unappealing to us. So Narada had this experience only on a very high spiritual level, that not only wasn't he his body, but he felt this communion with the Supreme Spirit, and he felt this exaltation. And then he suddenly lost it. So like he went back into his body, the bodily existence, the whole context, I'm sitting in a forest, came back to him, and he was in anxiety now, just like I am all the time while I'm in this body, because the mind is working. What's going to happen? Which part is going to fall off this machine next? How am I going to pay for it? So forth. It's constant. And then an unembodied voice spoke to him and said, "You're not in a perfect state yet, but I've given you a little sample." So sometimes in our practices, you get a little sample, or a big one, a big sample, a small sample. Actually, samples are usually small. So he only got a few seconds of experience, which reminds me, when I lived in Chicago for a while, there was a company that used to go out and advertise new candy bars. And so they'd have these young women bring out these big boxes of the candy bars, only they were a very small size. And they would give them out to people, and there's a long line down the street of people waiting to get their free sample. And when they did, then they say, "I want another," and say, "Sorry, now you have to go buy it." So in our practices, we may get a little sample of what reality looks like, and it's beautiful, and it's something that we'll have a thirst for after that. So it's worth the effort to take time every day, just like Narada, to sit down, do the practice. And as it turns out, he dedicated the rest of his life to come back to that stage, and he was successful. So that's something about the, I think we were addressing, which question were we addressing, Jayan?
It's experiential, not theoretical.
Yes. Hey, Lisa. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on. So let's see, any other comments, or if anybody else wants to give a reflection before we go on to the next few slides.
There are a couple of questions on face. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Raj. I just was actually resonating what you mentioned right now. I really feel alignment that the candy stores, the sample analogy which you gave it, because you have a more hankering for that one. So if we get a little taste for higher consciousness, I think then definitely would be a desire to go for it more sincerely. So I think that analogy really helped me connect that I must go for it further rather than only tasting the sample. So thank you.
Yeah, this is a principle mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita in a verse in which Krishna says, Vishaya vinivartate nirahara sadehina rasavarjam raso kyasya param vrisham nivartate. We may be trying to control our senses, but when we get a higher taste, then it becomes very easy because we've experienced something higher, and it's our nature to go after the best thing that we know about as soon as we see it. What are the questions from Facebook, JM?
Yeah, so one of them is from Nidhi. She's asking, does your spirit age and get wisdom?
Spirit doesn't age. Wisdom is inherent in the spiritual being. However, when we become surrounded by multi-energies that are lower energies, that wisdom tends to be perverted. In other words, we're seeing everything through a lens. Another example that's given is by the great teacher Chaitanya, where he's talked about a mirror. The mind, our consciousness is like a mirror. And when it gets dusty or even worse, it gets muddy, it's really difficult to see ourselves in that mirror. But through the cleansing process of bhakti yoga, then gradually it becomes clean and we can see things as they are. And there's a natural sense of ourselves, of our source, and we have a knowingness that's inherent within us that comes very naturally.
Yeah, one more question from Namrata. She's asking, how do we see others as who they are, who they really are, that is, as the spirit and not as their body?
Well, in the beginning, it can be very philosophical, but we can take it on the advice of these wisdom literatures. But we can make our own observations also. I had a recent, of course, I have interactions with animals all the time in my garden, but I had a very profound conversation with a spider recently who was on my desk when I came in to sit down and do some work. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and we had a communion. There was an understanding. He had these little eyes and feet, and we didn't speak exactly the same language. I don't think he has syntax, but we felt each other. His mood was, like, you're not going to kill me, right? Please don't. And I was like, yeah, why would I kill you? And then also, please don't bite me sometime when I'm not looking, okay? And he was like, all right, I'm cool. And I said, okay, I'm cool too. And I felt like it was a person there. There was a conscious, aware entity. People love animals generally, and at least they're fascinated by them. Some people love them because they're innocent for the most part, and they're very interesting the way they live. And when we see animals, we notice they love. They have attachments. They have love for others. And we can extrapolate from what is said in these wisdom literatures about the conscious self. And if we're observant, we look around and see, what animates the body and what kind of feelings are coming out of animals, even plants. They have some intelligence to them. Intelligence means consciousness. Consciousness ultimately means personality. There is no consciousness without personality. And so we're dealing with that all the time. So that's why we have these conversations, is to develop that awareness. It's called Shastra Chakshus. Chakshu means to refine your eyes through eyes of wisdom. So you're looking at the world through guidance from a higher level. And then you see things through that vision, and you can align yourself with others in that way. In fact, there's in one of the old books called the Upanishads, says someone who learns to see like this systematically never hates anything or any being, because he or she is feeling this communion with other forms of life. And when I speak of other forms of life, of all energies in the world, seeing they all come from the divine source. JM, I think we better go to the slides. We're in danger here of me running up the score all the way to the end. The material universe is called illusory because it has a beginning and an end. Oftentimes we check the weather, what's it going to be like, especially if a storm's coming in. We think about maybe in history about the comings and goings of various empires and so forth. But for a really huge, high up perspective of the universe, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's described how it's cyclical. It comes and goes, the whole universe. It's manifest at a particular time, and then it becomes unmanifest again. I'm talking about the material universe. It has a beginning and an end. Anything that's created also has an end. And those things that are not created are eternal. They exist forever. That includes us. We just happen to be mixed up in a universe that comes and goes. And for us, that doesn't work very well, does it? I mean, do you like it when you buy a new car and then it wears out? Or a house? Or how about your body? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 means you hate it, and 1 means you love it. Come on, give me a little love in the chat box, please. 10, super. Okay, good. We got 110. Let's get a few more numbers over there. Let's see the next slide. Mark 10, SN 10, Don 10, Mayank 10. Oh, 3. Mayank gave a 3. Okay, 10 plus for Linda. Thank you. The material world reflects reality. This is something we can take from Bhagavad Gita, this discussion about what is this world we're looking at and why is it so frustrating? If you don't agree with the premise that it's frustrating, we can talk about it. But the world reflects reality. And an example that's often given is the sun, when it's reflected on rippling water, sounds poetical, appears to ripple. So this world is an unstable energy, but it's a reflection of reality. So if you see an apple in a reflection, delicious Fuji apple, perfectly crisp, a little cool also, and you'd like to enjoy that, you can't do it in the reflection. That's why when I try to enjoy this world, it's a grosser matter, it's constantly changing, it's contrary to my nature, and therefore I can't enjoy it. I can't keep it. It slips through my fingers constantly, and it appears to be constantly moving because the energy is moving, and the what I'm seeing actually is a reflection of reality. So that means there is a reality, and that's a non-changing existence that's reflected in this world. So I'm getting faked out, basically. So we see the world on the mirror of the mind. So I gave that example earlier from Chaitanya. And so if you extrapolate from that this world's a reflection, and our mind, which is the center of all the senses, it's the clearinghouse, it is reflecting a reflection. We're really distant from the world, actually. This world is a reflection, and what we're seeing of the reflected world is actually only a reflection. So we get a reflection of the reflection. Just let you take that in for a second. And I want you to speak up, so be thinking any questions you have or any realizations that you want to align with this. So here's the next one. Reality is the source of all energies. When we forget the source of these energies, we see illusion or Maya. So that's a pretty philosophical statement. So let's come back into the Zoom room and process it a little bit. Everything comes from an original source. When I see things as separate from that source, that's called illusion. I don't see its connection. I lose the connection. That's Maya means that which is not. There's nothing that's not connected to the original source. When I see things as connected, for instance, everything that's happening is happening for a reason. And there's a cause behind it. And I mean, upping the ante here, the cause is benevolent, or the intelligence behind it that's causing it to move is intelligent as well. So there's a way in which everything that happens, all energies are coming from one original conscious divine source. And when I don't see that, when I lose track of that, then the Srimad Bhagavatam says I'm in illusion or Maya. And that's when I don't feel very good. Illusion's not fun. What do you think of that statement? Illusion is not fun. Okay, what did Lisa say?
Lisa says, can you go back to the previous slide about reflection on the mind?
Yes, let's go back. And Lisa, tell us what you're thinking, please.
Lisa, if you're speaking on mute, maybe.
You're on mute, yeah.
Or you can put in your questions in the chat box and we can read from the chat box as well. You can't
We
hear
see
it.
the world. Yes, go ahead. I thought I heard somebody speaking up.
No.
Okay, Lisa, when you can get off mute, just let us know. Are they locked in, Jan?
No,
Make
they
sure.
can unmute.
Okay. We see the world on the mirror of our mind. We are seeing the reflection of a reflection.
So were
Okay,
you
let's-
saying that the what we're seeing is a reflection of reality and our mind is a whole nother story? So each person's mind is reflecting the reflection differently?
That's right. There's a way in which our minds have different conditions of reflectivity. And we talked about this in previous sessions about how the mind is a material element ultimately, and it gets conditioned by three modalities, and therefore it reflects differently. I gave the very sort of simple example about the mind being covered by dust or mud, but there are various combinations and permutations of conditioning. So the reflective surface will see the world in a different way. We don't see the world the way it is. We see the world the way we are. Epictetus said that, the ancient philosopher, and this is the verdict of the Bhagavad Gita also. We're conditioned by modalities. Therefore, yes, it's a reflective surface and it's conditioned in various ways. So one of the effects of yoga, of the yoga practice, especially of the mantra meditation, is that we clear the surface of our mind so we can see things as they are, that we see them in the right perspective. Let me give you an example. Once I was flying in an airplane and I fell asleep. My head was on the window. I woke up. I went to use that tiny little bathroom that you can barely fit into. I can barely fit into. And then I was looking in the mirror and I thought, oh, my head is now lopsided. It must have been how I was sleeping. I look like a monster. And so in a sort of in a half sleeping state, I thought, well, there it is. Now I'm officially a monster. And then I moved my head about 2 inches over and I saw, oh, it was a blemish in the mirror. It's the same proportion as it was before. So there's a way in which when the lens of my mind or the mirror of my mind becomes blemished or it's distorted in some way, I see the whole world in that way. So yes, that reflective surface is important.
So is the original perspective objective, and then the reflection, our mind is subjective, but is there an objective view of the reflection? Or is that
Yes.
the
The objective view is to see how everything is connected to original source. For instance, if I realize that I'm looking at a reflection of a Fuji apple, then I'll say, where is the real Fuji apple? And where's the tree it came from? So the point is that there is an original source. We're part of that. We come from that. And let's show a few more slides because it goes into it more. Did Lisa want to say more about?
Yeah, she did put her question in. She's not able to go off mute. The previous slide makes me think about how since the reflections, we are reflections of a reflection. This is why there can be some deep disagreements and people can't understand each other sometimes. Not sure if I'm explaining myself clearly. Isn't this similar to Plato's allegory of the cave?
Yes, Lisa. Yes and yes. In fact, in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives this explanation of why people have different ideas about worshiping the Supreme. Is because they have different ways of looking at it. It's the same thing. There's only one thing, but everyone has a different vantage point. And we see the world, we have differences of opinion according to the conditions of our own minds. And the second part of what she said was,
isn't it similar to Plato's allegory of cave?
that's very similar to Plato's allegory of the cave, that there are cave dwellers who are basically conditioned to living in a cave. They're looking at the back of the cave, and behind them there are some fires burning, and what they see in the cave are the shadows created by that flickering fire, and they're moving on the back of the cave. And so people become entranced in that, and they think this is reality. Now somebody gets out of the cave and goes out into the sunlight and sees, oh, there's actual color out here. And they see variety. It takes them a while, however, he said, because their eyes have to adjust to the light. But after they experience what the world's like, kind of like us after the COVID thing, come back to like, yeah, now I remember there's actual people, not just reflections in a box somewhere. I like people, and it's kind of nice being around them in person. And then that cave dweller might come back in. And then he says, that person who went out should be careful not to be too abrupt in explaining. Like, no, you got it wrong. There's a world out there. There's light. there's colors, and everyone got that. This is heresy. You should be quiet. Don't say things like this. We know what reality is. It's right here in the reflection. This is all Plato. He's describing this. And so, he had that insight that this world is a reflection. It's a shadowy presentation. But reality is somewhere else. And that's that should be our preoccupation as humans, say these ancient wisdom literatures, because you can find it through this portal of the human body. It's discoverable by us with a little bit of adjustment in our lives. Okay, a few more slides. We have a relationship with our source, a companionship. So we have this relationship with our source. It's not something impersonal. And I use this word specifically, companionship. And let's look at it. Companion, look at this. Old French, literally one who breaks bread with another. I love that. It says panis means bread, pan. And kam means together. So it's such a affable word. The companion is somebody that we relate to, we actually break bread with. We have a relationship with our original conscious source. And these ancient literatures, like the Srimad Bhagavatam, describe that relationship is unique. Everybody has a unique personal relationship with that source, and it can be revived through the practice of bhakti yoga. You like the word companion? If anybody likes it, just say yes in the chat box. Linda said, is that why people say you're your own best friend? Well, as I've described before, the body's like a tree, and there's two birds in the tree. There's the bird that's eating the fruit, and there's the bird that is the proprietor of the tree who's observing us eating the fruit. So in sort of modern language would say, we're spiritual beings, but there's also a super spirit within the body. Or in the indigenous people of this land we live on here in America said, the great spirit. There's an all-pervading spirit that has various aspects. An impersonal aspect, an aspect that's localized within our heart, and also there's this even more personal relationship we can have. Yoga. What is yoga? Everybody knows it comes from, thanks for the thumbs up, Linda. Yoga, acting in a harmonious, loving relationship with our source. This is the ultimate definition of yoga. Yoga means yukta, or yuj. It comes from Sanskrit, yuj, which means to reconnect. How do we reconnect in the best possible way with anybody? It's through love. Love is the ultimate experience of the spiritual being. And we have it inherently in our nature. That's why we love everything. Ultimately, we become attached to everything, and we always will, but we're just attaching to lower things. So remembering our ultimate connection and attachment through love to our original conscious divine source in a personal relationship, then that's the ultimate, that's the pinnacle of yoga. That's reality. So yoga means our relationship with our companion. That equals reality. And some byproducts, some benefits, side benefits are that karma. We talked about karma extensively here, right? Karma means that the impressions in our mind that compel us to act in ways that we're not even aware of, perhaps, or even we are aware of them, we're still compelled to act, even though we may not want to. What do you think of the picture? Oh, thanks for all the yeses, everybody. The way we are compelled to react to what happens to us. That's a definition of karma that is very useful, I think. So karma binds us to illusion. I get addicted to the lower energy, and I can't stop doing it until, next slide, when we are in a harmonious, loving relationship with our source, our karmic life ends. Ta-da! Everyone celebrate, it's over. So rather than being pushed around by the mind and the senses, we react appropriately, if I can speak English here. We react appropriately to whatever happens to us. Reality is light. When we are in light, remember the cave? This is a good example, Linda. Coming out of the cave. Is that, you were the one who mentioned it, or Lisa was? Who mentioned Plato in the cave?
Lisa.
Huh? Lisa, thanks, Lisa. Here's your cave. Here's us getting out of the cave. Reality is light. When we are in the light, there's no darkness or fear. Now, so this is an important verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that says, Bhayam dvitiya abhinibheshita syad. Syad means when something arises, and bhaya means fear. We only become fearful when we see duality and we don't remember our connection to source. So reality is so beautiful, so compelling. The actual name in Sanskrit is Krishna. I keep saying Krishna, Krishna. So that name means the reality, the beautiful. Everything that we're looking for, that our heart desires, is within reality. So one of the names for the ultimate reality is Krishna. Oh, we just have a couple minutes left. So let's come back into the Zoom room and see if you want to give her a succinct reflection about anything you heard. What are you taking away from today in your pocket? One phrase, thought, feeling. When you walk out of your room and somebody in your house says, what was that guy talking about in there? What's the one thing you're going to say? You can put it in the chat or you can speak up. I'd appreciate it if you speak up because we haven't heard a lot of voices today.
Zira says, but we don't see reality, we see the reflection. So how do we know reality is beautiful?
Well, how do you know when a person is beautiful? You ever seen a beautiful person? When I see a beautiful person, I don't have to pull out a calculator or a little meter I get from Ace Hardware and say, like, let me check, like those thermometers they have now, they point right at your head to see if you have a fever. Like, are you beautiful? Let me check. I just go like, oh, It's like obvious, this person's beautiful. So reality is self-evident. When we see it, we immediately know it. Just like when the sun comes up, you don't say like, did the sun come up? It's like, no, it's there. It's there. So these truths are self-evident, just like it says in the Constitution of the United States, that we all come from the same original source. That's a metaphysical statement. What else, JM?
Nirali says, I like the definition of karma. I still reflect same way due to tendencies.
Yep, tendencies. These tendencies are what are determining the direction we go. So if we're able to reform our responses, we reform our lives. It changes everything. This one thing leads to another. It always does. And when we're able to change the way we respond to our environment, then we're moving in a completely different direction. We even, well, in this body, become liberated, transcendentalists. That's the whole point. We don't want to be in bondage, living in a cave, looking at the back of the wall, right? Please say yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We have another anonymous sub-reflection. If you
Okay.
believe this is the reality, after yourself again, is it reality? And ask again.
Is that a question?
So no, I think he's saying, if you believe this is reality, ask yourself again, is it reality? And
Oh,
ask again. I think that's what it meant.
Okay.
If you
All
more,
right. Couple more. Yeah.
Lisa says, fear subsides as we are more connected with the source, reality, liberated from fear.
Yeah, definitely.
And Zila says, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. A sea cow. Have you ever met a sea cow? I saw one in the aquarium. I mean, by human standards, we might say, you know, that's a kind of rough and tumble looking animal. I avoid using the word ugly, but the sea cow sees its mate as beautiful, I'm sure. However, seeing reality and recognizing beauty is a universal experience that's self-evident. And this is something, when we see it, we know it. Okay, JM, let's go out with a few mantras, okay? You can go to the Nitai Gauranga. So as we walk, before we all walk away from this today, let's do a little bit of mantra meditation. You know this mantra very well. It's the one that opens our heart to compassion for all living beings. And I'll say the mantra 5 times. You can repeat it with me behind muted mics. Are you ready? If you're ready, give me a thumbs up. I need a quorum, otherwise I can't start. 1, 2. Okay, you're good in the chat. Yes. A couple more. All right. Thanks, Anna. Okay, here we go. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. So you can keep that mantra going throughout the day. And you all know that high in the Himalayas, the yogis, they meditate in their caves, transport themselves to higher states of consciousness, but every once in a while they come out for some fruits, a few roots, and they see each other on the high paths of the Himalayas, and they have a habit of waving to one another with both hands high in the air so you can see each other. They can see each other on the peaks. They raise their hands up like this, and there's this phrase they say that means keep the vibration going. It goes Hari Bol. So everyone, please come off of mute, turn your camera on, and say Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Haribo!
Everybody, see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hari Bol.
Thank you.
Haribo!